Welcome to Spirit, Purpose, and Energy. I'm JJ Flazanes, your host, and thank you for downloading today's episode. I'll be honest, I had a hard time naming today's episode for a couple of reasons. Before I launch into that story, however, I will tell you, for those of you that are new to listening to the show, while I am the host of the show, I do also have a degree of expertise and knowledge and education in many different topics and areas that I bring onto the show. So I'm not just the host who, let's say for sake of simplicity, is the dumb host asking questions. I actually have something to contribute a lot of the time. Also, with that said, this show allows me the opportunity to get to know people like Karen Newell, who's on the show today, Dr. Eben Alexander, who will be on next week, Harville Hendricks, which you've already heard a couple of times, and other people that'll be on the schedule in the near future. So the show allows me a conversation. And I just want you to keep that in mind when you listen, if you're new to the show, because again, I'm not sort of the dumb host that's going to ask questions and that's it. I want to have a conversation. And so I talk and I have things to offer. And I also want to dig a little deeper than maybe some other people might. So I hope you understand that going into this. When I do have a guest on, it's always a conversation. I had a hard time naming the show today because I met Karen Newell through Dr. Eben Alexander, who wrote Proof of Heaven, and I started to learn more about her. She is the co-author with him of Living in a Mindful Universe, and there are so many topics that we could talk about that, an hour or even 40 minutes of focused time on one wasn't going to be good enough for me. I wanted to cover a lot of ground. I wanted to establish a relationship, and I wanted to give you a lot of different ideas, and I just got excited about the content. So Living in a Mindful Universe is probably not the most appropriate title for today's show, but it is the book that Karen co-authored with Dr. Eben Alexander, and I hope you'll check it out. She's going to make an offer for you to receive a free audio. It's a brain entrainment audio meditation from her company. And you can go to jjflazanes.com/sacred audio. And there'll be the free offer for that meditation from Karen, as well as next week, Dr. Eben Alexander promotes his 33-day journey, which I believe is both Dr. Alexander and Karen. So you can find both of those offers as well as other things on jjflazanes.com/sacred audio. Karen Newell has spent a lifetime seeking wisdom through esoteric teachings and firsthand experience exploring realms of consciousness. She empowers others by demonstrating how to connect to inner guidance, achieve inspiration, improve wellness, and develop intuition. She is co-founder of Sacred Acoustics and co-author with Dr. Eben Alexander of Living in a Mindful Universe. Welcome to the show, Karen.
Well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
I'm excited about today's conversation. I'm glad that I got introduced to you and your work through Dr. Eben Alexander. And being obsessed with Proof of Heaven, and then being led to you and the work that you've done with him on the latest book, Living in a Mindful Universe. So I've been reading that book and also studying some of your teachings. So I don't know where to start with you. There's so much that we're going to be able to talk about in today's show. My listeners and my audience knows that I'm very passionate about all the things that we're about to talk about when it comes to vibration, frequency, about the brain, about the heart, about feelings, about meditation. Like, we have a lot to cover, and they know that I'm not necessarily, I'm scientific, but not in the way that you are in this work. So my story came from a place where it just resonated when I heard certain things and certain principles, and I started trying them out. Can you give us a brief backstory as to how you even got interested in this work? Like, I saw some of your interviews and saw that you were a very curious kid. So was I. So I'm just curious as to what passion, like where the passion was sparked from. Can you tell us a little bit about your story?
Well, my original passion really did spark from being a child and being incredibly dissatisfied with the answers I was able to get about questions like, why are we here and what is our purpose? Religion wasn't answering those questions for me. Secular school, the science classes and everything else wasn't answering it. And so I always had this very strong curiosity. And as I was going through life, as I got a little older, I started to realize that there were alternative kinds of information out there. And so I started kind of a vast reading expedition on things like theosophy and anthroposophy, Kabbalah, very much Western esoteric information is what was interesting to me, because I could really grasp that kind of information a little better than Eastern teachings. What I was after was finding the universal truths, the things that all of these different traditions had in common. To me, the contradictions were very confusing, but when they said things that were similar, that's what sparked my interest. And so all of these traditions sort of talk about the idea that we are much more than our physical bodies. Some call it the soul, some call it spirit. There's different names for it, but it's basically an energetic vibration that we all are made up of in addition to our physical bodies. I also learned that there were ways to interact with this kind of energy. And when we're sitting here, going throughout our days, it's not so obvious how to do that. But something called meditation is a way to get inside of your own kind of energetic self and figure out what's going on. And so when I first sat down to try to meditate, I was a little intimidated because I didn't want to join a church or some kind of Eastern practice that required that you had to agree with certain types of dogmas. So I tried to do it at home alone at first. And it was very challenging to sit quietly and expect my brain to just empty of thoughts. In fact, what it would do when I sat quietly was just increase the thoughts. I would constantly just sit there and think. And so I thought, what a waste of time. I didn't understand the importance of meditation in action. I knew intellectually how important it was, how it could be helpful from all of the reading I had done. But it was sound that helped me finally to settle the thinking mind. And at first it was things like gongs or tuning forks or crystal bowls, Tibetan bowls, anything that has sort of that wah, wah. And these sounds are so beautiful to listen to and very mesmerizing. And it was brainwave entrainment technology specifically that helped me to settle the mind. And that was something that incorporates binaural beats. And these are very specialized tones that are created digitally to help bring the brain from that beta state of awareness, which is what we're in when we're walking around, when we're talking and active, down to lower states of awareness associated with sleep and relaxation and meditation. States like delta, theta, and alpha are much more relaxed states of mind. And so listening to these types of sounds helped me to finally quiet the mind and understand firsthand from my own personal experience that absolutely, yes, all of those texts were correct. There is much more to us than our physical bodies.
So when it comes to using these binaural beats, and when I started to listen to some interviews that you had done, and I heard it on the audiobook for Living in a Mindful Universe, first thing I thought of was EMDR. I'm a huge fan of EMDR, not only for the eye movement part of it, but for also when there's bilateral tones happening from ear to ear. And I guess that would be a form of binaural beats, right?
It is. And when EMDR directs you to go left to right, and somehow that plays this role of kind of putting the thinking mind in the background so that the issues that have been kind of suppressed, EMDR allows them to come forward. And so, yes, it's a very similar type of technology, but just from a different approach. We actually mentioned that in Living in a Mindful Universe, comparing EMDR to binaural beats. Now, Sacred Acoustics, the company that I co-founded, our recordings include binaural beats, but we also enhance those binaural beats with monaural beats. We combine the two to create something we call neural helix, which creates the opportunity to have a greater effect over speakers and not necessarily be required to wear headphones. There's an extra power that comes when you integrate the binaural with the monaural. And it's important to point that out because you can go on YouTube or download apps where you can get binaural beats, just any old kind of binaural beats that you wish. But there's different qualities of them. So it's important to remember that not all binaural beats are created equally.
Well, there was a company years ago, and I know they're still in, it's actually Centerpoint. Yeah, Centerpoint, Bill Harris's company. And I had purchased the hypnotherapy sort of beats, and they were using tones to stimulate different parts of the brain. And I remember using them once. It was years and years ago when I was dating a guy, and I was on a conscious side noticing my behavior. Like I was sort of analyzing my behavior with him, doing certain things and asking myself the question of, are you afraid that he'll forget you? And my conscious mind said, of course not. That's ridiculous. And then I laid down in my bed and I listened to some of these tones, which at the time had rain in the background. But you could slightly hear the tones, but they were supposed to be designed to stimulate parts of the brain that were either the subconscious mind or, again, parts that you don't activate normally. And it was as if there was a computer screen across my forehead that asked the question, are you afraid he'll forget you? And something in that moment while using those tones dropped down inside of me, hit something a little deeper in me, came back up, and I started to cry. And it was in that moment that I realized that I actually did believe that. But my conscious mind didn't tell me that I believed that. In fact, I would have told you, no, I don't really believe that. But then when I went through these tones, I realized that my subconscious did believe it. Now, is that a similar experience to what people might experience with the work that you're doing?
Yes, very similar. In fact, Centerpoint makes holosync, and they've been doing this for decades, as you say. And that was one of the producers that I tried way back. Their tones are very simple. Ours are much more complex, but everyone is unique. And so it is important to try the different technologies. Some will have a grander experience with that simpler formula, whereas a more complex formula may be more useful to others. But the idea is exactly what you said. When you put those tones your conscious mind kind of takes a back seat. The easiest way to kind of look at this is that you're putting your body to sleep by inducing with those theta and delta states of awareness, but your awareness is still alert. So mind awake, body asleep is a good way to look at this. And when your body is asleep, that's when your conscious mind is also kind of taking a time out, and you can access that underlying, some would call it subconscious or just lightly conscious, the part that we're not normally aware of. And yes, these tones are very good. I loved how you said that, you were all anxious about it. I'm paraphrasing, but you said something like how you were all anxious about it, but then when you listen to the tones, you got calmer and you're able to be more neutral, and you can see your situation in maybe a different light by taking a little step back from it. But these things can happen immediately when you start listening to these types of sounds, or it can take some time. It can take some practice. In the Western world, I know I was one of them. We expect things to happen immediately. We take that pill and we feel it. We know that it's working, but it's not necessarily the case with something like meditation. In fact, the word meditation was a word I avoided for the longest time, because to me it meant you were some kind of ascetic monk separating from the world. And I wanted to bring that sort of otherworldly energy into this world. And I've become more comfortable with that word meditation, but to me, they're more like sound journeys where you're going into your own consciousness and exploring what's there. And it's not always just emptying your mind, sitting quietly, which often is how meditation is described. We like to actually engage actively with our minds by setting intention, by asking questions, by interacting with whatever comes up. And this is a wonderful way to really make progress. If you already have a spiritual practice, it can take you even deeper. And if you don't have a practice, it's a beautiful way to get started. Really, all of us, it's our birthright to understand that we are much more than physical beings. There's a spiritual or unseen part of us that becomes accessible when we take the time to quiet our normal thinking mind and access those other parts.
One of the things I think most of my audience enjoys about the way I deliver some of this information, not the information that you have, the specialized information, but the general, what you just said about the vibrational, the other parts of ourselves, the spiritual part of ourselves, is that I bring along some of that left brain sort of frequency. Like, let's talk about physics versus sort of the very right brain, just emotional feeling, which I am, but I also can appeal to explain. And I feel like, while I've taken some brain quizzes and they said I was like 50-50. I don't know. It depends on which I practice more. If I'm in more of a logical mind, Dr. Alexander definitely feels more like 95%, right? Logic and reason, of course, very masculine, and in that logical reason and not emotion and scientific and linear. And when listening to you on the book and listen to your interviews and talking with you now, it's funny you're not the exact opposite of him. You're close enough to him, obviously, that there was a resonance of understanding and science as a background. You guys met at a conference, if I'm correct, right? And you did an exercise together.
Correct.
And that's how you, and it was something, can you tell us a little bit about that meeting? I want to combine your relationship and what we're talking about. And then I want to move to, just because I want people to know how you're connected and what to expect in living in a mindful universe. I definitely recommend everybody grab that book. The audio and actually the hard copy would be beneficial, but I want to take us on the journey of how that came to be. And then I actually love to go over, let's be a little geeky for a second for me. And I want to go over the different frequencies, if that's okay with you.
Sure. Yes. So when I first met Eben, we were at a conference we were exploring sound as ways to access expanded states of awareness. And I didn't know about his book. I knew he was a neurosurgeon. I knew he had a near-death experience. His book hadn't been published yet. In fact, he didn't even have an agent yet. But at any rate, when we met, it was very interesting because I said I had met other people who'd had near-death experiences. And I asked him, what was the most important thing that you learned? Because so many people learn these deep, profound spiritual lessons. And that's what I was expecting him to explain to me. But instead, he looks at me with great passion and intensity and says, I learned the brain doesn't create consciousness. And I was confused, and I looked at him and I said, why would anyone think that it does? And this was kind of the really illustrates the two extremes that our belief systems were at, because I did not believe that the brain created consciousness, because I had already experienced it in a way that convinced me that consciousness is eternal and lasts forever. And so how could the physical create something energetic? To me, that was very obvious through my personal experiences. So this kind of set us into some very interesting conversations. And yes, the first day of the program, we were participating in an exercise, and he happened to be standing next to me. We were all instructed to hold our hands in a circle and feel the energy as it moved to the left, and then feel the energy as it moved to the right. And then we were asked to pair up into partners. And when we did this, we were asked to walk into and then back out of each other's energy field. So one of us would stay still, and the other would walk towards the other person. And the object was to, as we got closer to that person, sort of see if we could feel any difference in the air or, around us. And usually when you do this exercise, you can feel a little heat or a little kind of difference when you get closer to that person. And as Eben and I were doing this, walking in and out of each other's energy fields, he explained to me what he was feeling. And he said to me, I feel the yin and the yang of our hearts joining as one. And I thought, oh my gosh, that's what I'm feeling too. But I wasn't brave enough to say it out loud because I thought it sounded so crazy. But we felt our energy intertwining in such a way that it was very clear that something was going on. And so intellectually and energetically, we felt a very strong connection. And from that point forward, I had for about a year, when I met Eben, up to that point, for about a year, I had been working with Kevin Cossie, who is someone else I met at a sound conference. He is my co-founder of Sacred Acoustics and is the primary audio engineer. And he and I had been making our own recordings for a while, just for fun, our personal use. He was in New York and I was in Baltimore, and we would listen at the same time to these recordings he would make. And we would then tell each other what experience we had had. Now, I had amassed a huge library of different brainwave entrainment and other type of meditative music and sound. And so Kevin and I together went through and analyzed all of that and figured out the best techniques that worked for us and then how to make them better. And so when we met Eben, we, for the first time, invited someone else to listen to what we had created. And when he listened, he actually was up in New York meeting different publishers for his book, Proof of Heaven. And since Kevin lives in Manhattan, met him at his hotel and had him listen to our recordings. And he was blown away. And from that moment forward, Eben started telling me that he and I together would travel the world and teach people all of this. And I thought he was crazy because I had no interest in public speaking or teaching or any such thing. I was just interested in my own personal exploration and growth. But he was right. And over time, he did start including me in workshops he was invited to teach. And through trial and error, we figured out what worked, what didn't work. And so together, that's what we do. And we ended up writing that book, Living in a Mindful Universe, together.
Before you continue, I know that, and I haven't gotten past that chapter yet. Did I hear that? Because I know he was super excited about being a part of you guys starting or looking at these tones and having you be in 3 different locations and see what you experienced and getting into a state where you had similar experiences. And I know for him, wanting to return back to his coma state, to the frequency, to the vibration, to this near-death experience feeling that he had. When were you able to get there?
Oh, yes. Really, what happened is we would all 3 listen together, and then we would tell each other what happened. And normally we would have a shared intention. So in these cases, we were not saying, let's all go to Eben's near-death experience. We were doing different types of things. I'll give you an example. We might say, let's go back and see what was going on in Earth in ancient times, or what's going on a particular planet. Just kind of just adventurous sorts of journeys. But Eben on his own, we all have different reference points. And mine are different from Eben's. But Eben has that beautiful near-death experience that he had. And so it's very easy for him to remember what it was like to be there. And then when he's in these expanded states, he actually feels as though he's returning to those realms. Now, he'll tell you this one little caveat. He's not experiencing to the same depth of the hyper reality of it all, because he really still is in a functioning brain and is more, in this world than he was during his coma. But he has amazing experiences reconnecting with his spiritual guides that he met there, with his father who has passed away. And yes, he regularly experiences going back to those realms. But this is not to say this is what all of us should be doing. I have a different approach and a different sort of way to get in touch with my inner being. And each of us need to develop our own unique way of doing that. It can be really discouraging to expect that we will suddenly be having these amazing experiences such as Eben describes during his NDE, but that's something that can really get in the way of your own progress. We call that experience envy, when you're more concerned about matching someone else's experience than your own. And I learned firsthand when exploring with Kevin, Eben, and myself that the 3 of us have completely different ways of gathering information and getting different types of information. But when we would exchange our stories, we would all kind of have similar types of things to report. So while I may just simply know or feel something, and Kevin literally sees with his eyes like he would see in the physical world, it doesn't mean that either of our experience is less valid than the other. And so it's very important to start exploring for yourself and see what happens. And once you see how you respond to these kinds of tones, you can start employing things like intention and asking questions like we do in order to start meeting any or all of your personal goals.
Do you believe that I do, just set it out there, that when Eben was in his coma state, obviously he expanded. So whether it be his soul expanded, his awareness expanded, his frequency elevated, expanded, whatever. So him matching that, and I agree, that's a great point to tell people that when you go into meditation and using the tones and the binaural beats and you're going down this path, because I completely believe we all have the ability. I mean, I know that we all have the ability to get into such altered states. I work with people who astral project. I haven't tried to do it, but I heard that you guys were talking about it, and maybe are you doing it, or are you teaching people or learning how to do it?
Well, I have done it. And the thing is I've tried everything: lucid dreaming, astral travel, Tibetan dream yoga, Reiki, healing touch for animals, you name it. I've tried every kind of form. Every is a strong word, but many will say types of different forms of dealing with energy. But yes, astral travel, I spent several years actively learning how to do that. And I was able to astrally travel. The thing is for me, those kinds of things, remote viewing is another one I spent a lot of time doing. Things like remote viewing, astral travel. Once I proved to myself I could do it, I lost interest in continuously doing it, because I am much more interested, as I said earlier, in how to bring that energy into my life here and not escape into that world. And not to say that others may find that to be very useful and helps them grow in different ways. But again, we're all unique. So for me, those types of things, I'll call them glamour. They're wonderful techniques to learn, to prove to yourself that they're real. And yet from there, really just incorporating that knowledge into my being makes it easier and more fulfilling to go throughout my life. So yes, I have learned how to astral travel and lucid dream and all of those things, but I don't actively practice them on an ongoing basis, as some might imagine.
But because you've experienced them, like you said, the benefit to experiencing them is understanding and deepening your trust in the process of what you're capable of that time-space continuum of our larger energetic field, if you will. I call it source or creator versus God, but let's just say that sort of universal love that a lot of NDE and people talk about in terms of getting back to. So to me, the ability to do that, again, Eben's coma, was that confirmation of something bigger, something greater, and our, I would say, inaccurate, most of the time, small-minded, lack of focus, lack of expansion here on this planet in these physically focused bodies, that we only, we look at our lives in a very small, minute way. But when you have an NDE, or when you have an experience like astral projection or lucid dreaming, or you can cross realms or the veil, so to speak, and have relationships and conversations with people who are all energy and not, like you just said, Eben's father's passed away, and still continue that relationship, whether it be through channeling, through a medium, through yourself, through your meditation, through your intuition, acknowledging and realizing. Because I agree, there's the difference between practicality and living something, but also trusting and understanding. And I think those things prove to us that, and not that I don't. And it's funny because there's some of us that when I interviewed Harville Hendricks and his wife, Helen, like Kelly Hunt, I asked a question that they had a difference of opinion on. And she very, very, very calmly talked about the difference between different types of knowing. And then at first I thought she was just sort of patting it nicely. And I realized afterwards that I agreed with her. One was more intuitive knowing and one was more logical knowing. And he uses his logical brain to figure things out and uses science. And she uses her intuition more than he does. And for me, listening to things and understanding, like I said, I have someone I work with who astral projects. No one needs to prove that to me. But the benefit of these conversations conversations that I have with you or Eben's book or the work that you do is for that person on the edge who's really, really trusting, who really wants to trust, but can't really grasp it yet, to hear some of this, scientific information about that it's possible, or that here, let's take frequency, which is where I want to go next. But I know I asked you another question, so I want to go back to that question. The question I asked you was about your sort of left to right brain ratio, or your interest in, like, different than Eben, your interest in science and scientific proof versus intuitive knowing. What would you think your balance would be?
Oh, I'm much more the intuitive knowing. Now, logic is very important to me, because if something doesn't fit logically, then I need to, throw it out. And when you start exploring in these spiritual realms, you'll find that there's a lot of sketchy information, I'll say. And so at first, it's very easy. I remember when I first met Eben, he was so excited about exploring the spiritual and getting to know all of this type of thing, because he had been this academic neurosurgeon for all those years. And he was like this and that and this, and he was so enthusiastic. And I said, no, that's not where you want to put your attention. You want to maybe put it here, because like you had described this way of knowing things where you just kind of go inside and feel if something's true or not. And this is something I did when I was a child, and I came to call it my truth meter, where I could actually sense if something was true or not. Now, if other information outside of that feeling contradicted it, then I had to explore further. And so it's a true balance. I love how you said you were 50-50. I haven't taken such a quiz, but I know that I do rely on, I'm also, along with being an intuitive person, I'm also a very technical person, not necessarily scientific, but technical, because I've done web development and network management and email server management and all of that stuff that involves a lot of very straightforward technical information. So I too can dance in both worlds. And I think it's very important for all of us to really become more balanced in that fashion, not only with our analytical mind. Critical thinking is still very important in this realm, along with trusting, as you said. And that's exactly what the astral travel, the remote viewing, the animal communication, all those things I did taught me that I really am a powerful being, and I don't need someone else to tell me anything anymore. I can find out for myself. It's really quite remarkable the kind of confidence you can gain, especially with all those crazy very wide range, I'll say, of worldviews out there. That's what I mean by crazy. Not that the worldviews are crazy, but that there is a crazy number of them. Which ones are true? They all seem to contradict each other. And this is where, when you can find that inner trust and knowing of your own inner truth and your own personal truth, this is where life starts to just become a lot more easy. And, I don't get concerned when other people are spouting off, when scientists say, oh yes, memories can't be stored. Memories are stored in the brain, and it's birth to death and nothing more. I used to get really upset when I would hear things like that. Now I just realize we're all on different paths. We'll find our own truths as we find them. But one thing I wanted to mention, you're going to ask me about vibration, so I think I'll hold off and work it in there.
Oh yeah, we're gonna dive into vibration quickly before it gets out of the flow state here for me with other ways to look at things or analyze things. Do you know your sign or your chart?
Yes, I am a Sagittarius sun sign with a Virgo rising.
Which, your moon?
My moon is Cancer.
Okay, there we go. Go.
Yeah,
Okay.
but okay. my moon is in the 11th house, which is apparently me. I'm supposed to be so emotional, but apparently I'm more in touch with all of humanity than one-on-one, if that makes sense. Because my Venus is in Capricorn, and I got a little trouble there. So, at any rate, yeah, I'm very well versed in my astrology.
Well, here, so we have the yin and yang, if you will, about the sun and moon. So my sun is Pisces and my moon is Sag. So in terms
Ah,
of water and fire, right? So
yep.
Sagittarians are truth seekers, Sagittarians. And I have 3 Sages. I have my soul, my rising, and my moon are all in Sag. And so there's this yearning for knowledge and truth seeking. At the same time, there's a balance with being really fascinated with things that are spiritual, which are bigger than we are, which aren't necessarily always provable. So there's a little bit of a trust in a Sag as well as, and it's never an end point. So anyway, I was curious. And of course you do present a little bit like a Virgo because you seem very, structured and linear,
And organized.
not
Yeah.
organized, and which for me, which is the opposite of me, which is sometimes
Well, that's your Pisces. Yeah.
right.
Pisces.
Absolutely. Right.
Yeah.
I'm like,
Yeah. Eben is a Sag too. So.
okay. Oh,
Yeah. And I
this.
have 3 planets in Sagittarius. So I gotcha.
Cool.
Yeah.
Do you know Eben's moon? So I don't have to ask him.
Eben's moon is Aquarius.
Okay, that's why that's the talker. Okay.
Yeah.
That's also the lack of feeling.
Yes.
I mean, yeah, because
he can relate to, he's like me in another sense, relating to all of humanity.
Yes.
Easier than one-on-one.
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yes. That explains a lot. I was actually wondering if there'd be some Virgo or maybe even not Capricorn. He doesn't have, I don't sense Capricorn, but I sense some kind of maybe Earth that kept him, Taurus, maybe truth seeking but has to be provable in that scientific, like it has to be provable. It has to be repeatable. It has like all that scientific stuff.
Well,
anyway.
you'll like this. His Uranus is right on his midheaven, which apparently is a marker for a surgeon. So yeah, very interesting.
Well, see, and I use that as energy. I see astrology as energy and how people interact with each other and how people interpret information. So taking that and we're going to integrate frequency into this in a minute, and vibration. I want to go over those different levels of vibration and frequency that you go over in the book and that I heard you talk about on another interview. But when people, but again, I use it very scientifically, and some people just think I'm, crazy. And I say, well, but it's that Pisces sort of knowingness where I'm like, no, I know when it resonates. I'm not scientific. I'm not repeating the same situation over and over again and then just looking at one little variable. It's not scientific, but I'm looking at how patterns play out in everyone, in every relationship, how people hear, how people think, how people interpret, what they take on personally, whether it be, anyway, I've just used astrology as a science to me, because again, it's a science of energetic combinations, which also can affect where you vibrate, where your frequency is on a regular basis, depending on how much you're connected to your emotions. And so I think the further away we are from our emotions, the more we're in our head, the less that we're necessarily utilizing the majority of what our power is.
Well, I'll tell you something kind of interesting. When I met Eben, of course, I learned he was very much an astronomy enthusiast, very into cosmology, physics, and constantly watching the stars. And of course, I was really into astrology. And so I did his chart. I have the professional software. I can do the charts. And I did his chart and started explaining to him. And it was so funny when he saw, oh, yes, my sun is here. And whatever it is, 14 degrees Sagittarius. And he went back to his own astronomical ephemeris and said, oh my gosh, you're using the same data as we are. And I'm like, yeah, that's the truth. Astrologers aren't making up their own data. It's very funny how the right meets left and east meets west and science meets spirituality in our relationship. And we really are finding a very interesting common ground, because when I looked at Eben's astrology and started pointing some things out to him, he was absolutely amazed that astrology could do what it does. So it's pretty interesting.
I'm so thankful. And I'm going to talk to him about this in our interview, of what I think is proof of heaven is his story is the perfect law of attraction story, which I'm going to talk to him about because it's somebody who wanted something so badly, but had to manifest the exact scenario to get it answered. Right. And it's
so interesting to look at it from that angle.
Oh, yeah. I'm like, this is perfect law of attraction. It's so specific. And anyway, I'm looking forward to that conversation, but I want to wrap this into also where I do want to bring some science, because everybody hears me talk about emotion on this show, and I want to bring in just a little bit of proof. I had a friend once who, some people, he's a mathematician and again, a Taurus, wants proof, not spiritual at all. So he says, right? But his heart emanates so much more trust and spirituality to me than he says that he necessarily believes, in the way that he acts in the world. And at some point I bought Bruce Lipton's book, and I haven't read it, but because when I heard it, Biology of Belief, I'm like, yeah, totally. Our cells have energy and we act based on our belief systems, which is a frequency, which is an emotion, which is our reality projecting into the world. And then we're matching it. And I didn't read it because I bought it in order to sort of read it, to argue with him, to prove him wrong. And then I thought, okay, never mind. I don't need to do that. And because I know, and I trust, and I don't need to do that. And that leads me to connecting that to the story in the book about the scientist who was opposite of Eben in a conversation, who had a very, negative point of view about some of the things that Eben was talking about in Proof of Heaven. But then he wrote something in a journal after he and his wife got married. It was with the radio that didn't work. And then all of a sudden the radio worked, and she thought it was her dad or her grandfather who had passed away. Right. And that whole story, and how he published the story and didn't have any proof of why the radio worked while it was broken in a drawer and for 24 hours or however long it went. But then however many months later, when Eben saw him at another conference, and he changed his tune.
Well, what's really funny, this was Michael Shermer, actually, and he's a very hard line scientific materialist who writes for Scientific American. And he actually, what happened was he told the story in his Scientific American blog that, oh my gosh, there must be something to this. It must have been the spirit of my wife's grandfather that was operating this radio. And then all of his readers started giving him a hard time and said, oh my God, how can you blah, blah. And he immediately then backpedaled on his whole story and said, oh, there must be an explanation. And when Eben saw him again and said, oh, what was that explanation? He said, oh, we don't have one, but we know it can't be true. He defaulted right back to his materialist attitude after being chagrined by his readers. That was the shame of it all. So
definitely. And that's where when someone, like, let's say, using him as an example, I see that as someone who has so much fear about being accepted that they can't decide to take a risk about what they think might be truth, and being comfortable saying, I don't know. And so I'm not going to try to convince that person. Here's where I want to link this into frequency. So, because to me, sometimes I believe that a lot of scientific effort is really about, and we all know that you can take any study, and depending on what you're trying to find, depending on how it's conducted, which half the time is not necessarily, you take a small test group of people and you're coming up with some crazy claim, and and it's not at all controlled. There's so many factors that aren't being regulated that could influence the outcome, and yet we're making a claim. So it's really like whatever you're looking for, you're going to find if you set it up correctly, which to me leads back to vibration and frequency. So if this person is unwilling to, they're stuck in in an emotional frequency of distrust, of fear, of shame, of things that they're not really opening up their mind, and they have a lack of trust because they need to have something repeatable, something so concrete. Yet this world is not concrete at all. There is nothing about, not nothing, but there's so much, so changing that to me, it's always some of the smartest minds. People say, oh, well, that person's so smart. He's a scientist. He went to MIT, whatever, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, okay, he's human. And, right. And we all die and we all have experiences. And it doesn't mean that there's not another explanation. So now I believe that's going to be, we're going to run into people. We're going to learn our lessons based on the frequencies and the beliefs that we have. So with that, can we go over for my audience, the geeky side of the science of vibration and frequencies?
Yeah, in terms of the sounds that we create, the different frequencies are targeted to, Eben would say, as a neurosurgeon, they're targeted to influence the lower brainstem. And so as these frequencies vibrate at these different rates, it actually affects the lower brainstem, which is a very primitive part of the brain, and returns us to that pure vibrational state. And so it's very challenging to know exactly what's happening with the sound. And I like to make sure I point out that this is a theory of Eben's, because there's many different theories and not everyone really knows exactly what's going on there. But the idea of frequency for me, I love how you describe that I think you're describing this, that we each have our own frequency, and that frequency is created based on our particular emotional state. And so this is where I love to bring in, for me, the science that really helps me understand how all of this frequency and vibration works is actually from heart math. And the Heart Math Institute in California has been studying the heart scientifically for decades. And what they found is that it emits an electromagnetic field in the shape of a torus. And so it comes out the top of the head, kind of like the hole in the center is the top of your head and then where your heart is. And it comes out from the heart around the body like a donut in all directions, and it's moving constantly. This electromagnetic field, which is made of electromagnetic vibrations, expands and contracts based on your emotional state. So this field is manageable by each of us. And it's actually our birthright, I say, to understand how this works, because this is going on whether we realize it or not. Our thoughts and emotions are affecting this electromagnetic field. What's so interesting is that they found that my electromagnetic field is affecting your electromagnetic field if you're nearby me. So whatever is inside your own electromagnetic field of your heart is influencing people around you, whether you realize it or not. And so if you're in a bad mood, you're kind of spreading that bad mood to other people. But if you're in this big, happy, gregarious mood, you're spreading that happiness to other people. They have done studies where people sitting across the table from each other, one person is performing what HeartMath calls a coherence technique. A coherence technique is simply generating a feeling, not a thought, but a feeling of gratitude in the heart. And when one person does this, the other person sitting across from them, their heart rate variability and their brainwave state starts to match the person sitting across from them. And so this is something that has really helped me. One school of thought taught me that thoughts are electric and emotions are magnetic. And so that electromagnetic field, I feel as though I have direct ability to influence by consciously managing my thoughts and emotions. And to me, this is the meat, the heart of the vibration. Now, when we first start listening, I'll tie it into the music again. When you first start listening to Sacred Acoustics recordings, we have a free download, and it's our ohm frequencies. And many, not all, but many of our recordings begin with these ohm frequencies. And when people listen, we advise that you actually vocalize the ohm along with the recording. So anything that creates a vibration in the back of your throat, when you can create that vibration and feel that vibration in your physical body, and then hear the vibrations of the tones while you're using your thought and emotion vibration to set an intention, the three of those things, the physical, the non-physical, and the sound, work together. They seem to resonate. And when you are focused on a particular thing, let's say you want to know, what's my purpose for being on this planet? That's a huge question I know that I had and that many people have. The technique I applied in order to learn how to fulfill my purpose, I wanted to know in my head, what is my purpose? What is my purpose? And I asked that question constantly in meditation. And I got various answers, but I didn't believe any of them. And what I started to do was start to feel in my own body, in my own energetic system, that I was living my purpose. What would it feel like if I was living my purpose? I generated what that would feel like. It would be satisfying. It would be fulfilling. It would be all of these wonderful things. And I started to pretend, I'll say, that I was living my purpose by generating that feeling within and then letting it interact with the sound, let the sound carry it away, and then wait for the universe to deliver. And this was a beautifully effective way of really getting my thinking mind out of the way. by thinking of myself as a vibrational being and understanding my thoughts and emotions are made of vibration, and understanding that the sound is also a vibration that I can interact with. When we really live that awareness and understand, we can do all kinds of things. Now, I must say this, when you first start paying attention to the heart, you mentioned it earlier, something triggered you and made you cry when you were listening to binaural beats. And this is not unusual. Some people will start listening, and if you're also putting attention on the heart, you can often start to feel emotional. Now, it's not necessary to know why. That's the first thing. Oh my gosh, why? Where is this coming from? I need to know. I want it to stop. What I learned to do was to just let myself feel whatever emotions were coming up. I learned over time that these were past emotional traumas, some minor, some not so minor, that I had actually stored in my system because I had never properly processed them. So many of us, including myself, don't learn how to process our emotions. We learn how to suppress them. And so they just sit there waiting to be triggered by some future event. And so when the tones can trigger those emotions, when our attention to the heart can trigger those emotions, it allows this opportunity to, in a closed sort of setting, release those emotions by allowing ourselves to feel them. And when we start to release those stored emotions, they start to be replaced with what I call emotions of our pure essence, of who we truly are. And that is that love that we're all made of at the core. As you said earlier, so many near-death experiences encounter this deep love. And they say, many of them, that you can't bring that love back here, that it's only for the other realms. And I have to tell you, some of my experiences and meditation have been incredibly filled with forces of that unconditional love. Absolutely amazing to feel this energy. And I can't say, because we can't know what one person's love feeling, if it matches our love feeling, but I have many times felt connected to that unconditional love of the universe, love of source, whatever you want to call it. And it comes from within. And so I spend a lot of time actually generating loving feelings from within. And the more that I do this, the more that I sort of automatically am in this loving vibration all the time, the more that the rest of the world just seems to, as the law of attraction at work, the rest of the world seems to fall into place. And so many times people are so anxious about knowing my purpose. Why am I here? And what I say is, just start vibrating as if you already know what it is. And lo and behold, your purpose becomes clear.
I'm glad you mentioned that about the near-death experience and the love and being able to get there without having it near, or, in your mind, getting there, your feeling of getting there without having one. There's been many meditation retreats and things that I've done where people's goal, and not everybody accomplished it, was to get what they called was a direct experience. And their direct experience left them in this euphoric state for a long time with that sense of oneness and connection with all. And I do believe that you don't have to have a near-death experience to do it or to get there. And I'm someone who likes to promote or find ways to vibrate, to practice, to take time, to set aside time. I'm trying to help teach people how to process emotions, because as you mentioned, most of us don't, and we spend the time repressing. So we talk a lot about addiction on the show, and anxiety and repressed emotions. And I heard you mention in the other interview that I saw that you did, but that, you at first thought maybe it was a problem that you were experiencing negative feelings from the binaural beats, which we discussed earlier in the show. I mean, we could talk for like 2 or 3 hours today. I'm like, there's so much to talk about. But that's kind of the point of EMDR, right? Like EMDR is about dislodging those sort of stuck negative experiences that run our lives and our subconscious, bringing them to the surface so that we can feel them and release them.
Exactly.
And so would you say, and by the way, everyone who's listening, you're going to get a free download, and we're going to go to jjflazanes.com/sacred audio. And you're going to get the free download to try some of this with the binaural beats. And then of course there's I think there's a free video series, and then you can purchase other audio programs for specific situations. So you can go to jjflazanes.com/sacred audio, and you can start right now. It's a 20-minute it's a 20-minute audio, and I would recommend that you practice it often. Now, let's talk about, I still want to go back for a second though before we talk about how to use that, how for people to best use that audio and what they should expect to get out of it, and sort of the process of, again, experiencing and releasing, and maybe not having such a specific goal in mind that might shortchange them from an experience that they would have if they were just open to receiving and allowing the process to unfold for them in whatever direction they need to do. But I really want to, just because, again, I just want to add a little geeky science in here that I can't provide, or I could, but I'm not an expert in it like you are. The different levels of frequency and the different states of vibration that we experience, like gamma and theta and beta, and where, like explaining those a little bit. Can we go over that?
Okay, yeah. Well, beta is the easiest to explain because that's the state we're in, walking around. That's the state we all seem to want to escape when we want to, quiet the mind. And as measured by an EEG device, which measures the electric signal coming out of the brain, that's roughly 12 to 30 hertz. And below 12 hertz, that's where the magic comes in. So roughly 8 to 12 hertz is alpha. That's known as kind of a relaxed state of awareness where you're getting quiet and maybe very focused on one thing. Theta is roughly 4 to 7 hertz, and that is associated with deep meditation. Theta and alpha are both associated with dream sleep. Now, delta is associated with sleep and coma. That's 0 to 4 hertz. And it's that border between delta and theta I talked about earlier, right around 4 hertz, that seems to be a nice little magical sweet spot for a lot of people. We call that the hypnagogic state. And we're actually all in that state every single day as we're falling asleep at night. So the body is starting to get relaxed, but our mind is sort of wandering, kind of half asleep, maybe reviewing events of the day, but starting to get quieter. We're in that state again when we wake up in the morning, although then it's called hypnopompic state. But that's where you're first, kind of realizing, oh my gosh, where am I? If you're in a hotel room or something. That's the state that we're trying to induce when listening to these different frequencies. And so it can behoove all of us to get out of that beta state of awareness that we're in all the time. Now, interestingly, last year, we completed a pilot study with a psychiatrist in Manhattan in New York City. She wrote up that paper, and it's actually been provisionally approved and accepted by a medical journal, the Journal of Nervous and Mental Disease. And in it, we found that her patients, when they incorporated listening to these recordings on a regular basis for at least 2 weeks, found a 26% reduction in anxiety just by adding tones to their daily routine. And so they were allowed a lot of flexibility in how to listen. And I've just actually completed a little booklet that includes all of that protocol, and it will become available to the Sacred Acoustics website in the next month or so, hopefully by the time this interview is up. And you will find that exact protocol that was used. And there's also a second book called Heart, which focuses on all of the emotional aspects we've been talking about, and a third one called Spirit, which really you kind of want to have your thoughts and emotions and some kind of ability to manage them before you move on to Spirit. But that's where we get into more interesting types of ways to interact with consciousness beyond just quieting the mind and dealing with our emotions. And so there's a very wide range of ways to approach listening, and there are many benefits that come, and each of us is unique in those benefits. And so it's important to try to, for yourself, to see what might happen for you.
So now let's talk about the protocol that the short protocol, I guess, maybe, that you would recommend just for the average person who's going to download this free audio and try it out.
Yeah, well, this is a 20-minute file, so we highly recommend that you use headphones or earbuds. This is so you can get the full effect of the two different frequencies in the ears. And but if you only have speakers, that's okay. You're going to want to have good quality speakers, and very recommended that you have a 2-speaker system. Very common. We have these 1-speaker systems now that combine the left and right channels. But again, there will be some effect, but not as much. There is a series of what I call training videos, also free on the website, that will get you started. But basically, you want to put that recording on and listen to it at least once a day for 20 minutes. That's all it takes. And from there, you can, have goals, you can set personal, different kinds of things, keep a journal and all of that. That's all included in the training series videos, also free, like I said, but just start listening. That will help you once a day and see what happens.
That's awesome and exciting. And I can't wait to continue using it myself. I just downloaded it today. Karen, we could probably talk for a long time because I find that you can add so much more credibility to some of the skeptics who think that, oh, she's just woo woo and this isn't scientific or provable, and you're being able to provide more of that scientific data that, quite honestly, I have interest in, but my brain goes, oh, I just know it. Do I have to prove it to somebody else? Can't you just?
Well, JJ, I am like you, and I will credit Eben with kind of forcing me to speak in more scientific languaging for people like that. But the bottom line is your proof comes from your own personal experience. And it's really important to try it for yourself and not just armchair, decide that you know how it all works. That's the main message.
Yeah. And being open, when you were talking about learning how to astral project and the lucid dreaming and things, like, I don't have any, not that I believe it. Like, when people tell me things, I go, yeah, okay. Yeah, I believe it. I don't have to do it to believe it. There's just a knowing I have about, yeah, I trust that that's possible. And other people who come to me. So, but to hear that you can train yourself to do it, I mean, maybe I might be interested in one day, but currently I love hearing that we're starting to incorporate this in a more mainstream way to help more people, because ultimately the whole goal of, I believe, your books, your work, my work, is to help free people into a life, into an experience, into an empowerment, into a co-creation, using intuition, really getting out of what I think our society has become more of. Now, again, it depends on what you're looking at, right? Whatever your frequency is, if you're looking for more people who have more addiction and anxiety, which there are, because we're speeding up the rate at which information is traveling and that we're getting it. So just by how the essence of what's happening in the world, technology is at a place where we can't catch up our brains. We're not built like a computer, but our frequencies and our vibration we can still decide how we react to that versus getting caught up in this sort of lightning speed of information.
Exactly. Now, it doesn't take much to look around the world and see what problems we have related to that addiction and to those kind of spiritually empty types of problems. Eben and I liken this to being related to the idea that our main worldview in the Western world is that we're nothing more than epiphenomenon of chemicals and neurons in our brains. And by returning to this idea that we are much more than that, by getting that back into our worldview, I believe this will improve quality of life and we'll start to make different decisions, and our world will truly become a better place if we all start to realize we are more than just products of chemicals and neurons by some bizarre chance. It's much more deliberate than that, and we are here for a purpose, and it's time for us to really understand that and start applying it in our lives.
Agreed. And I also appreciate what I heard you say in one of those interviews about looking for what was similar in different spiritual or religious belief systems versus what was separate, what was different. And I think that's the key too, to remember that we all are connected on a much bigger, broader level than we tend to remind ourselves we are. And that doesn't necessarily mean you have to always be with people, but just on an energetic level. And again, everyone that I've ever heard who's had an NDE, every interview I've seen, everything I've read, obviously Dr. Alexander, it's that I hear that and I go, yeah, I know that. Yep, that's what happens. But the average person goes, no, that's not what happens. I'm like, okay, well, you'll learn. Yeah. I've even had conversations with clients that that who are skeptics or don't believe or haven't asked the question or they're not curious. And I go, oh, that's fine. That's fine. So when you cross over, you're going to know, you're going to come back.
Yeah.
You're going to come to me in a dream and be like, oh, hey, it's like, it's fine. You're going to get that you're so much bigger than this. And
well, you have to meet people where they are. And I had to be met where I was. I wasn't ready to hear all of this maybe 15 years ago, so it's all an evolution and we're all in this together, as you said.
Yeah. And we want to just tap into and connect with those who are searching for this information. They are curious. You are ready. And for no other reason. I mean, I just posted something on Instagram yesterday that said, people aren't going to hear what they're not ready to hear, or something like that. And right. And someone just wrote back on my post and said, oh my gosh, this is so true. My mother gave me all of your books and I wasn't ready till now. And I found your podcast on my own. Like, what, divine timing is timing. And like you've mentioned on this show today, we all have our own separate journeys. Our paths are going to be different. Our goals are going to be different. Our experiences are going to be different. And ultimately, we're all just here to help each other live a better life while we're here, and to experience as much of that deep connected love and abundance and trust now, versus we don't have to die to get there. We can do it now. And I think that's what everyone's seeking. Let's get off medications and stop repressing our feelings and embrace the wholeness, the oneness, the love that we really are. And these are techniques that can do that. So I'm very excited to start using the free audio from you and have everyone else download it. Again, it's jjflazanes.com/sacred audio. Listen to the trainings, do the videos, and start doing the 20-minute meditations and the binaural beats. And I can't wait to revisit this. And I'd love to have you back on if you're interested, Karen.
Oh, absolutely. And then we could go even deeper after you've tried some sound.
I would love that. So are you doing any kind of events? I know I want everyone also to get Living in a Mindful Universe, if you haven't, as well as Proof of Heaven, because they're both amazing books that can give you insight and continue helping you. And if you're that person who is slightly skeptical still, or needs that scientific data, or needs all of that, or just wants to have it, or wants to help other people with it, again, they're books worth having in your library.
Yeah, and our events, if you could just go to either sacredacoustics.com or ebenalexander.com, it'll list all of our different events. But something we're very excited about this year in October 2019, we're going to be teaching 2 separate week-long training courses to practitioners, so that they can actually learn how to apply these recordings in their practice. And for those who need a coach or a therapist to help them along with some more severe issues, they will be equipped to do that with the sound.
Well, I'll be looking into that. Where is that training?
Oh, well, one is in Omega
Yep.
Institute in upstate New York, and the other is at 1440 Multiversity in Northern California.
That one is probably more my
Yeah.
speed, because I'm in LA. Okay.
Yeah, they're both in October, and the dates and all the information will be listed on our website shortly.
Excellent. Well, Karen, it's been such a pleasure to have this conversation with you. I look forward to having you back after I've had a little more experience. And yes, I'd love to go deeper, because everyone who's listening to this right now has most likely, if they're a member of my community, has done other kinds of meditations, and they're always looking for sort of the next step of growth and expansion, and any kind of tool that can help them get there, because we're all, again, seeking some of that same love and trust on a more regular basis to help life.
Wonderful. Thank you for doing what you do.